Hello and welcome to Cal Talks. This is a special episode recorded at the 2026 Florida Cattlemen Convention in Marco Island this past year. This episode is composed by two sections. First, Dale Sandlin and myself recorded an interview with Dr. Andrew Schwartz, chair of the Department of Entomology and Hematology at the University of Florida. Dr. Schwartz is sharing with us the meaning of the recent detection of screwworms just across the board from Texas and New Mexico, and what it represents to Florida livestock agriculture and wildlife. In a second moment, we're going to bring the presentation that Dr. Schwartz gave during the opening section of the convention, giving a little bit more context to our listeners and hoping to share some of the perspectives of what this pest means to us. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Hello everyone, and welcome to Cal Talks. My name is Marcelo. I'm the Forge Extension Specialist with the University of Florida and your host. And today co-hosting with me is Dale Sandlin.
Dale Sandlin with Southeast AgNet.
And Dale and I have been recording a couple of episodes here about the Florida Cattle Enhancement Board. So if you want to learn more about the projects financed by the Cattle Enhancement Board, please check the Raising the Facts podcast with Southeast AgNet. And we're co-hosting today because he's also releasing this episode through his podcast. So take a look in his content. There's a lot of great stuff. Bill, thanks so much for being here today. And our guest is Dr. Andrew Schwartz. Dr. Schwartz is a chair for the Department of Entomology and Hematology at the University of Florida and a recurrent guest in this podcast. Last year, for those that have not listened to that podcast yet, last year we recorded 2 episodes about the screwworm. And today we're here to get some updates about the situation of the New World screwworm, what it represents, what the new findings in Texas and in Mexico represents to us in Florida and in the Southeast, and start getting some action plans and get Dr. Schwartz's perspective on what this means for the state. Dr. Schwartz, welcome.
Yes, thanks for having me back.
So screwworm is pretty much the topic of conversation all over the Cattlemen Convention here. We're recording this at the Florida Cattlemen Convention in Marco Island. Both of us spoke about the screwworm, and it was a very well-attended topic, and many people were asked more. Why is this one of the main topics of conversation today here at the Florida Cattle Convention?
Yeah, I think even though the screwworm is not new to Florida necessarily, it was here in the 50s and 60s and before that, but we've gone through a number of generations that have never had to deal with this problem. And, the idea of having your animals infected with flesh-eating maggots that could eventually cause some really gnarly damage or even death is pretty jarring. And so I can understand why people would be concerned.
So it is a pretty serious problem. In 1 year, it went from southern Mexico where it was, and now it's in the border in Texas, right across the border. How did we get there, and what does that represent for us here?
Yeah, so as you mentioned, about 1 year ago, it was still mostly in southern Mexico. But keep in mind that it had been spreading out of Panama for the last 2 years before that, pretty consistently. And the amount of flies, the sterile flies that we use for eradication, which is kind of the gold standard that we know works. We've had the same amount of fly production since the beginning of this, about 100 million flies. That hasn't changed. And it's spread continuously with that same amount of flies for the last several years. So there's really no reason, if it wasn't contained before, why would now all of a sudden with the same amount of flies, why would it all of a sudden stop moving? And so what you've seen is a continued progression. Certainly those flies are surely having an impact, slowing it down, knocking out hotspots. But yeah, basically it's kind of a natural progression of that spread.
Okay. So far we're continuing the progress as was modeled and as was expected.
So I can't speak for what USDA has modeled, but from my personal view, this is just in line with what I would have expected. I am actually I had thought it might even come in a little bit earlier, but yeah, I think this is pretty normal.
Can we talk real quick about the movement component of the New World screwworm, specifically the fly? How far does it travel naturally versus what we've seen in the last 10 years?
Yeah, so just flies, just in terms of where they can move around, is not super far. I mean, they're probably in reality not moving very far from a host. They're not trying to migrate long distances. How far could one technically fly on its own power if it really wanted to just have a little long vacation trip? I'm not totally sure, but maybe 15 miles. We're not talking about it's not going to fly across states or anything like that. Most of the movement where you get these big jumps and movement is due to animals being moved or the animals moving themselves that then have the infection and then are spreading it in the new place. You often have seen, especially over the last year, you'll get these periods where there will be a whole lot of outbreaks. You'll have a whole lot of like new records, and then there'll be a few weeks and they'll be like, it looks like, oh, there's nothing going on. It's just kidding. Like all of a sudden, like then it starts again. And that's kind of pretty typical. And that's what we've kind of seen even in the US here. Like we had 2 weeks of kind of continuous cases until this last weekend. There's kind of a week where there was no recorded thing. Now, the last couple of days, there's almost a new county every day that's spreading again. And so I think that's going to be a pattern you're going to see moving forward as well.
And then it pretty much grows exponentially. The more counties get recorded, it keeps on going faster and faster.
It will depend upon how, part of this, because it is animal movement, then you get into like, well, how strict are we controlling animals? How much are we getting on top of those outbreaks in a timely way? Obviously, it isn't completely uncontrolled, and I can't speak to what Mexico might have been doing to control its internal cattle movements compared to what we're doing. So that's a kind of for me, that's an unknown.
I know this is not your area, but I was curious to hear more about the cattle movement. So we have some restrictions in place that are from the Florida Department of Ag implemented from the commission, so we can still move cattle from infested areas, right, to have a certificate.
Yeah, there's kind of a two-tiered system, and I encourage everyone to go to the fdacs.gov/NWS website for the latest, because it does literally change almost every day as the different records of the counties spread. But there's kind of 3 tiers. There's kind of like moving cattle and animals from an actual infested zone. So you can still move animals after a short waiting period with certain criteria. So there's no hard quarantines on that. But there usually does have to be a few days after an initial recording before an animal can be moved, and there has to be a certificate of veterinary inspection and also permission from FDACS to enter the state. And then there's this other kind of peripheral areas outside of the infected zone where there are requirements for veterinary inspection, but not necessarily as stringent or prior permission necessary. But again, you'd have to check FDAC's website for that, because that does change regularly.
You mentioned the sterile flies that are being produced in Quebec now, with the potential for additional flies to be coming in the next couple of weeks, hopefully, from the Matapa facility. What would you expect the impact of those additional flies being produced have on trying to stop?
Yeah, so right now, since the beginning of this outbreak, we've had just the one plant, 100 million flies. USDA is expecting the Mexican conversion, the plant there that they've converted to produce up to 100 million additional flies. So the numbers I've seen are between 60 and 100 million. When it's up to full speed, it's not going to be up to full speed the day it's opened its doors, so it's going to take some time. That'll double the capacity that we have. But just keep in mind, as I mentioned yesterday during my talk, it's like the current capacity, if you look at through USDA's kind of regulate, how many flies you need to eradicate things, it's about 2,300 flies per square mile. So currently we have a roughly 44,000 square miles up to treatment. So if you double that to 200 million, now you're at touching about 90,000 square miles where you can drop flies. Texas is 261,000 square miles. Those are just facts. Obviously, having double the capacity is going to be great, but how much relief that will provide will be really dependent upon how much it is spread by the time those new flies come on board.
Can you talk just a little bit about the sterile insect technique, so that way producers can better understand what they're looking at when they create these pupae? They're not just creating males of sterile male flies, they're also creating sterile females as well. Can you talk a little bit about the nuts and bolts of that?
Yeah, so basically when they're rearing flies, obviously during the maggot stage, we don't know which ones are males, which ones are females. And so half of them are going to be male, half female, and they all get irradiated. They're all sterilized. But when they're dropping these flies, to eradicate, half of the production that we are spending our money and time on are females, which do nothing for the eradication effort. And so that has always been the way it has worked. There are efforts underway now. The USDA, what they're calling the Novo fly, would create a male-only strain, and that would essentially allow production to double in terms of effective flies, because you're no longer having that 50% female to 100% male. So you're still producing the same number of flies, but they're all male. So you're essentially doubling the impact of those flies. So you can essentially drop half as many right in an area. I think that's really cool technology. And I'm really optimistic that will eventually be part of this toolkit. It is untested so far, right? We've never actually mass reared this male only strain before. And like any kind of new genetic breed or seed. I mean, until you actually test it in the wild, like how well is it really going to stand up to field conditions kind of situation and mass rearing versus kind of boutique rearing. I'm not privy to kind of the details on what's been done on that right now. That is very promising, but I don't know how soon we would see the impact of that, like this year, for example. That's, I think, uncertain.
Yeah, I think there is a long road for us to go in terms of being able to cover that area. And that's one of the reasons you mentioned that we're likely going to see it coming to the rest of the Southeast.
We have to assume that it is going to, at some point it is going to come into the Southeast. I think that we have to take the position that it is at some point it's going to come in to Florida, come into the Southeast or a neighboring state. And knowing that that is going to happen, making sure we're prepared now for like how will we respond and having an action plan so that we're not taken by surprise. And I think a lot of folks have been, like this podcast, like everyone, has been talking about this, like doing a lot of educational activities, a lot of extension events, trying to get everyone up to speed, being vigilant with your herds, paying more attention to individual animals. All of that is going to be key to success, because if it comes in and it's not noticed right away and then starts spreading and gets into wildlife, that's a very not good scenario.
To your point on the wildlife side, so far, all of the cases that we've seen have been in livestock. We haven't seen any reported in wildlife. Is that surprising to you?
Yes, and I said there's no confirmed cases in wildlife. That doesn't mean that there aren't cases that are going unnoticed or that haven't, might be suspected. But yeah, it is a little surprising to me that there's been now almost, I think, to this morning now up to 19 cases in 8 counties or something like that. And it has been exclusively, except I think for that one dog in New Mexico, I think exclusively livestock. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if that's accurate, like there just isn't in wildlife, or that's just a reflection of how many animals we're checking. Like we're very attuned to livestock right now and checking all those herds very diligently in those infested zones. And so that's where you're going to find the infections. But yes, it is surprising that there's no wildlife.
That goes to the reporting side. You mentioned the vigilance and the reporting. Can you tell us a little bit more why that is important? I think producers often get worried about reporting because that's dealing with the government and they want to interact with the government, especially in this case. It's something extremely important.
It's really critical. I mean, for two reasons. One, like the life cycle of these maggots in the animal is 7 days. So if you don't catch it in your herd right away, like there will be some loss like immediately. The second thing is, because of that, like if you don't tell anyone within 7 days, if we have an infection, like then you're dropping out, several hundred flies from each one of those infections that are now spreading, and it's going to make it spread worse. But the main thing is if we notify people right away that there's an outbreak, then we can ask USDA to bring in those sterile flies to eradicate it in that area. That's the whole. So to get it under control, so you and your neighbors won't be under the scourge of this pest for a long time, you'll get priority for these flies. At least that is what we believe will be happening, and that will protect everyone.
You mentioned about the importance of planning and how we respond and having those action plans. I also know you're involved as and participate in several working groups. Can you tell us a little more about what is going on behind the scenes here in terms of coordination between the different agencies and actions we're ready to take to be able to tackle this problem as it becomes forward?
Sure, absolutely. We've had kind of a loose working group on Screwworm since this started last year, but obviously now that it's much more serious, we've kind of elevated that into a weekly task force meeting with the Florida Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services, and I think we're going to be adding in some people from FWC, from the wildlife side as well, to make sure we're hearing all the different sides of it in Florida. We're planning a bunch of trainings, not only for extension agents to make sure we're getting out and training our own folks in the community to be able to host more events, but also planning some public webinars for producers and industry, and certainly doing some other coordination on the research front behind the scenes, making sure that we're getting any kind of special local needs exemptions for certain insecticides or products that we can approved. I know that one of our faculty, Ted Burgess, has been working on that very hard and has been moving some things forward so that when there is an outbreak, I think those again, the other educational things are going to play a key role.
Perfect. There is a lot of information that we covered throughout this past couple of days here. If you're curious to hear more about Screwworm or any other pest, we have a lot of episodes in this podcast. And also, as Andrew mentioned before, take a look at the FDAC's website. We're going to put the website link in the description of this podcast to facilitate that. And we'll keep reporting about this spread in this case and keep on top about the screwworm and also other pests we've been seeing in the southeast here. It seems to be the year for entomology problems and challenges here.
So as the seer of the plagues, as I've been saying recently.
Fantastic.
Dr. Short, thank you so much for your time. We appreciate you being very gracious with it today and joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks for being here.
Thanks.
This was common in Florida, common pest that we dealt with up until 1957 to 1960 when it was eradicated. At that time, if you look at the literature, between 75 and 85% of all wounds in livestock would become infected with screwworm. So this is not if it becomes reestablished, this is a very serious issue. It's not like one cow is going to get it. It is going to be pervasive in the environment if it fully reestablishes. Also, you'll see a lot of maps about this, but just to show you part of the reason that Florida is particularly at risk, unlike most of the country, Florida, we will have screwworms year-round. If you're in Virginia, if you're in Kansas, the winter will wipe them all out. You may have them seasonally. They'll move up there. In Florida, that will not occur. They will be here, and they will be here year-round. So it is very, very important that we do not get it in here, and if we do get it in here, we take care of it swiftly. This is showing you, like, this is some historical maps. Those two red spots I've highlighted, those are the two main areas where New World screwworm can live year-round. So that's why it's ultra important for Kansas, or sorry, for Florida. You've heard a lot about this sterile insect technique, probably. So how do we eradicate them? We basically mass rear millions of flies. We sterilize them. We release them. Those sterile flies mate with the female wildflies. They don't lay any eggs that can hatch. It eradicates them after a few generations. That is the tried and true method. It's how all the original eradication happened. It's how it's happening now, and we will ultimately get it back under control. The problem is we don't have enough flies. This was the current state in June of 25. So it's just in southern Mexico, not really quite past the narrow isthmus there. We have the same number of flies then as the same number of flies now. And in that time, it has spread all through northern Mexico and into the U.S. And we have no more flies than we had then. So you can do the mental thought process. If we can't stop it spreading and we have the same number of flies, what does that mean to the spread now? It's probably dead. So this map is already outdated from June 21. There's already two more counties in Texas as of yesterday that it has recorded, and I do not assess that as going to slow down. It's kind of going to this problem, just to show you kind of what we're talking about here. There's the current production capacity is about 100 million flies. There's only one plant that does this in Panama right now. It takes about 2,300 flies per square mile to eradicate. That means they can treat 44,000 square miles of screwworm. Well, the state of Texas alone is 261,000 square miles. So Mexico, 750,000 square miles. And they're not even treating most of Mexico right now, so it's establishing itself in the wildlife and going crazy. So we can talk about best case scenarios, but the math here is just not working for us right now. Second problem I mentioned with Florida. This is a climate modeling on what is the best, candiest habitat for these flies. Do you see what's in red? Us. Not good. This doesn't predict where it's going to be, but it does predict how well the fly will like it. And it really is going to like Florida. So again, not good. We have a lot of faculty working on different projects. We have faculty working on more and better treatments, trying to get some more emergency authorization uses for different products. We have people working on making better flies. We have people working on better surveillance and trapping mechanisms and training and outreach. So we're trying to do all we can. But this threat is going to be pretty bad this year. I'm not going to lie. There's really no way to sugarcoat it. And so things that you can do. Right now it is not in Florida. So it's really the important thing is to be really vigilant. Be really vigilant in checking animals. Be really vigilant in making sure that you're checking wounds. Be familiar with the signs of infestation. And if you see anything, it's timely reporting is so critical. It is so critical that we nip this in the bud if it comes into the state. Because if it comes into the state and it's not noticed, it's going to be very bad. The second thing I just wanted that you can do right now, stay up to date on FDAC's New World Screwworm protocols. Their website is awesome. It has all the information you need to know. There is no quarantine in terms of animals hard moving out of Texas, but there are different protocols depending on if it's an infested zone or not an infested zone, what kind of treatments or what kind of veterinary inspections it has to undergo. So you can get animals, but it has to be done the proper way. And these rules are changing constantly. as the situation constantly changes. So please stay abreast of these to make sure that you're following the best thing to protect Florida from this coming in. But I just want to be clear. I am expecting this will come into Florida this year. That is what I think is going to happen. We hope it's not going to, but I want to make sure that I'm honest with you that it's probably going to come in. So we want to make sure we're prepared. These are 3 key resources that have a lot of great information. USDA's main screwworm.gov site's amazing. FDAC's New World Screwworm Clearinghouse. And we just set this up on Monday. We have an IFAS page now as well for kind of more Florida-specific information. And yeah, I went through a lot of news, but happy to take questions.
This podcast was brought to you by the University of Florida Forest Team with technical support from the UF CAUS Faculty Instructional Resource and Support Team. This episode was produced by Marcelo Wallau, Olivia Mowley, and Ashley Calabrossi. I hope you have enjoyed this conversation. And if you have any feedback, please leave us a comment in our social media or send us an email to forages@ifas.ufl.edu. Until the next one,